questions. Question orale.
Well, I hope you're joining us today.
We learned today that David Johnston's report was not only written by a former family friend and former member of the Trudeau family, of Trudeau Foundation, but that an assistant who helped is a Liberal donor. David Johnston hired Liberal and New Democrat consultants to help with public communications. Can we finally put an end to the charade, Mr. Speaker, and trigger an actual public inquiry?
So the Governor General former Governor General did not write his own report.
Mr. Speaker, while the leader of the Conservatives continues his unfounded attacks against the former Governor General and his team, he claims that he wants the real answers. All he has to do is to accept the top secret briefing that was offered to him, offered by our intelligence bodies, to understand what is happening when it comes to foreign interference. But he refuses, Mr. Speaker, to do so because he prefers to remain in the shadow of ignorance, to continue to simply do unfounded attacks, personal attacks and partisan attacks. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition
was forced to remain behind a veil of ignorance by his own admission today. He said that he was not aware of information that the former Conservative leader already knew about the government in Beijing spreading disinformation using state organs. This is on top of learning today that Mr. Johnston hired a lifelong Liberal donor who was at a fundraiser with the leader of the Liberal Party just 2 years ago. In addition to other Liberal consultants and NDP strategists to do damage control, will we put an end to the act and fire this rapporteur and call a public inquiry now?
The drama never ends with this one.
Mr. Speaker, let me read a quote on the former Governor General. I think we're dealing with a very credible individual, and I think that distant history bears little relevance to the fact that he has a very distinguished career. If we're suggesting just because at some point in history he was appointed by a former Conservative Prime Minister that he should be disqualified from participating in public life, I think that is a little bit extreme. This is a very qualified individual, and frankly, I haven't heard anybody question his integrity, and I have no reason to do for it. That, Mr. Speaker, was the Leader of the Opposition. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order. 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 The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Which is another reason that it is so tragic that that Prime Minister has destroyed the reputation.
Well, he's got him there.
The former member of the Trudeau Foundation in this terrible position and surrounding him with Liberal staffers, Liberal donors, and Liberal lawyers. He has ruined the perceived objectivity, caused a conflict of interest, one that he could reverse anytime. Why will the Prime Minister not put an end to the charade, launch a full public inquiry now?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Opposition formerly said, David Johnston is a man of integrity, and when I chose to appoint him to be an independent expert, I didn't hold against him the fact that he had been appointed by Conservatives past. I knew that his judgment was top-notch, and that is what he has demonstrated every step of the way. The judgment that is in question is the judgment of the Leader of the Opposition, who continues to refuse to get briefed up on top-secret matters that would allow him to understand what's actually going on in foreign interference instead of making baseless personal attacks. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's no longer just me that's pointing out that deficits cause inflation. It's the former Liberal Finance Minister, John Manley. He says this government is putting its foot on the inflationary gas while the Bank of Canada is slamming its foot on the brakes by raising interest rates on Canadians. There are literally hundreds of thousands of families who took on big mortgages when interest rates were artificially low that will face massive increases in their monthly payments when they come for renewal if rates don't get back down. So will the Prime Minister balance the budget to bring down inflation and interest rates so that Canadians can keep their homes.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Speaker, in the name of austerity, the Conservative Party continues to filibuster and block our measures.
I'm just going to interrupt. We're starting to build up again. Yesterday was such a nice day. I just want to repeat, everybody can take a deep breath. And if the words are too big, then Google them. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Prime Minister, from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party continues its focus on austerity and cuts rather than being there to help Canadians. They are blocking and using parliamentary games to hurt Canadians who need help right now. He's busy blocking an anti-flipping tax for residential properties to help out
There they go with that
homeowners.
anti-flipping
He's
tax
blocking
again.
the doubling of tradespeople's tools deduction at a time where we know we need our tradespeople to continue delivering new housing across the country.
That's the only
And he's
talking
even
point they
blocking
have.
the Enhanced Canada Workers Benefit. His partisan games are hurting Canadians. When will he let BIA pass?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Families are already facing austerity, and families have to make cuts themselves into the amount of food they can eat and other activities that their families would like to do. What we are blocking is the $60 billion of inflationist deficit that has fueled interest rate rises. Even the Minister for Finance admitted that deficits put oil and fuel on the inflationist fire. Will the Honourable Prime Minister finally listen to his own Finance Minister, and will he stop to add fuel to the inflationist fire? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's just ridiculous words again. He's accusing us of austerity whilst accusing us of investing too much. That's ridiculous. Just like what the leader of the official opposition is doing now is blocking measures that will help Canadians now, like an anti-flipping tax.
There's that
Like a
anti-flipping
measure to
tax
double
again.
Deductions for tools.
And tool deductions.
And
Yes.
against
That's-
strengthening worker benefits.
That's all I can reach
He
for.
voted to block dental care for children. He voted to block help for low-income renters. The Honourable Member for Belley-Chambly, Mr. Speaker, the not-so-independent rapporteur tabled a preliminary report, much to the satisfaction of the Prime Minister. To do so, he did not speak to the Chief Electoral Officer. He did not speak to the Elections Commissioner. He spoke to no one from the Chinese diaspora that have been victims of bullying and intimidation. And then, with great wisdom, he decided that a public inquiry was not necessary. Mr. Speaker, who did David Johnson actually talk to at the end of the day? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I know full well that the leader of the Bloc Québécois looks forward to David Johnson's tour of the country to talk to the Chinese diaspora that has been affected.
Well, that's going to be a bit of a waste.
But the Bloc Québécois is choosing ignorance on the matter by refusing to accept briefings, top secret briefings from intelligence bodies on the content of reports and on reports from our intelligence organizations. He can continue to do unfounded partisan attacks, but he needs to read the facts. The Honourable Member for Belley-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, when I talked about the Prime Minister's ignorance, there was a point of order. But I think that that David Johnson talked to the Trudeau Foundation. It's better among friends, after all. I think that the rapporteur spoke to the Prime Minister, but we don't know if this was to actually do any rapporting at all. This morning, he explained that an investigative inquiry would be too long and would be too costly. It's quicker and cheaper to keep secrets at the end of the day. Mr. Speaker, was Mr. Johnson's true mandate to simply put a lid on this entire story of foreign interference?
That's a good question.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Bloc Québécois perhaps would be a bit more credible when it comes to keeping secrets if he were to accept information that would lead him to hear about the facts about foreign interference. He refuses to allow our intelligence officers to give him the necessary information so that he can truly understand what is happening when it comes to foreign interference. He chose ignorance. He did not choose facts. For such a serious matter, this shows us that he is not serious at all. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The cost of a house has exploded under this Prime Minister. We look at the rising interest rates, that's making things even worse. Here's the situation in the city of Toronto. For someone earning $256,000
That's
a
the
year,
question. Will interest
has to
rates
wait
go up tomorrow?
25 years before they have enough money for a down payment, according to a CTV article. That is absurd. That is something very serious. When will this Prime Minister take this seriously and start taking steps to deal with this housing problem?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know Canadians are struggling with the rising cost of housing, whether it's a young family looking to buy their first home or a student trying to rent an apartment near campus. That's why we're taking action on so many fronts. We're helping Canadians save up for their first home. We're investing in building and repairing more homes, including supporting local governments to fast-track
And we're all buried in debt.
100,000 new homes.
Mess
We're
that
providing
Trudeau.
support for low-income renters.
Buried in
We're
debt.
ensuring housing is used as homes by curbing unfair practices that drive up prices, which includes bringing forward an anti-flipping tax, which unfortunately
There it goes.
Conservatives are choosing to block for political gains instead of delivering for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The shift.
The Leader of the Opposition would have us believe that he understands the people of Canada whilst being in a state-paid housing with a chef and a gardener. He's just there to protect the rich who are profiting from this crisis, but for ordinary people, rising interest rates are hurting, and there's even a rumor that the Bank of Canada is going to raise interest rates again. I apologize for interrupting the Honourable Member. There was an issue with a lot of noise in the House. I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but people are chatting a bit loudly today. I would like people to whisper.
If they're going to speak to each other, the noise is just starting to creep up again, and I don't want it to get out of hand. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South from the top, please.
The Leader of the Opposition would have us believe that he believes people whilst he stays in an official residence paid by the state with a chef and a gardener. He's just here to protect the rich who are profiting from this crisis, but for ordinary people, rising interest rates are hurting, and there are even rumours that the Bank of Canada is going to raise interest rates again. Does the government have a plan to reduce the disastrous impact of these rates upon the majority of Canadians? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians have many challenges when it comes to paying for their housing, and that is a reason for which we are acting in a number of ways. Our plan will have collaboration with municipalities by investing $4 billion, for example, to accelerate approvals and creating 100,000 new housing units. There will be ties between investments in infrastructure and housing. Our plan helps Canadians to save for their first house. It also helps low-income renters, and the Conservatives voted against. It also converts federal land into affordable housing.
Finance Minister admitted that deficits fuel inflation. It's hard to believe she even understands this concept, as her government piled on more debt onto Canadians than every government before them combined. This led to the highest bank interest rate hikes seen in a decade, and now 63% of Canadian paychecks go towards monthly mortgage payments alone. After knowing all this, she still threw a $63 billion jerry can of fuel on the inflationary fire that she started in her failed budget, and now a mortgage crisis looms. Could you tell us on what date she'll stop her inflationary spending and balance the budget so interest rates can finally come down?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker,
Kirsty is back.
opposite represents an Alberta constituency. And I'm
Hey, she
sure
really dressed
he and
up
his
today.
constituents, like me, are proud of Alberta's Ukrainian-Canadian heritage. But I wonder if his constituents know that the blocking tactics of these Conservatives are stopping measures in the BIA that would support Ukraine.
What
They are
the-
preventing us from withdrawing most favored nation trading status from Russia and Belarus. That is the practical consequence of the blocking and filibustering and the partisan jockeying of the Conservatives.
The honourable member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
My constituents, like all Albertans, rejected this Liberal NDP government and elected a strong Conservative government just last week. And she can spare us over Disney Plus, Mickey Mouse lectures, because not all Liberals are as incompetent as this government is. Former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley said Liberal spending fueled inflation. Former Liberal Premier of Nova Scotia, Stephen McNeil, said governments continue to spend beyond their means will only increase inflation. How come random Liberals understand the importance of balancing a budget and this incompetent Liberal government doesn't?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is worth ensuring that Canadians know the other vital measures which this partisan posturing Conservative opposition is denying them. This Conservative filibuster is preventing Canadians from getting advance payments of the Canada Workers' Benefit. They are blocking a crackdown on predatory lending. Who would oppose that, Mr. Speaker? They are blocking the extension of
Didn't you say that
seasonal
yesterday?
EI. Again, I'd like to know if their MPs from Atlantic Canada are aware of that and support that outrageous, appalling action.
The honourable member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister recently said what Canadians want right now is for inflation to come down and for interest rates to fall. And that is one of our primary goals in this year's budget, not to pour fuel on the inflation of the inflation fire. But that's exactly what they did, Mr. Speaker. Budget 2023 adds $60 billion of new spending. That's $4,200 for each Canadian family. That's more higher costs, higher inflation, higher taxes. When will they get their budget under control and control their out-of-control spending?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about some facts. When COVID hit, Canada suffered the deepest recession since the Great Depression. But today, unemployment is at 5%. You know what, Mr. Speaker? Under Stephen Harper, the lowest unemployment got was 6%, a full percentage point higher than it is today. And you know what else, Mr. Speaker? Today, women in their prime working years, the employment rate for them is more than 85%. Under Stephen Harper, the highest that ever got was 83%. Our policies are getting Canadians back to work, Mr. Speaker. That's what they need.
The honourable member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, what their policies are doing is rent payments have doubled for Canadians, mortgage payments have doubled. Most young Canadians have even given up the hope of ever owning a home in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And now Canadians are concerned that the Bank of Canada will have to raise interest rates again just to keep up with their inflationary spending. So once again, Mr. Speaker, when will they balance the budget and solve this inflation crisis?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I understand why these Conservatives prefer rhetoric over facts. And the reason is that their policies led to such a lackluster recovery from the 2008 recession, which was much more mild than the COVID recession. It took Canada after 2008 110 months to recover to the pre-recessionary unemployment rate. After the COVID recession, just 24 months, Mr. Speaker. Things have been hard for Canadians, but thanks to our government support, people are back at work. That's what matters the most.
Louis Saint-Laurent.
The honourable member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, you might remember one of the most bizarre statements when the Prime Minister stated that budgets balance themselves. Well, no one repeated this because it's completely ridiculous. The issue is that after 8 years of Liberal governance, the budgets have never been balanced on their own, deficit after deficit after deficit. But Mr. Speaker, here's a little secret. Last November, we thought there might be a light at the end of the tunnel. The Minister for Finance stated that they shouldn't put fuel on the inflationary fire. That means controlling expenditure. So why has she changed her mind? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for Louis Saint-Laurent for his question. I hope that Canadians who are watching us today will be aware that the Conservative Party today is delaying investments in clean electricity, delaying investments in clean technology, delaying investment in clean hydrogen. Mr. Speaker,
Oh, this
are they
champagne guy
really
is
listening
so
to
totally
Canadians
at
from
the
time to
lunch.
time?
That's,
We are building tomorrow's economy. We're investing in the future. We're taking generational opportunities. And the
look
Conservatives
at
are
him sitting
blocking
up there on the
Canada
front
from
bench
moving
with a
forward
lot of other
into
losers.
our 21st century economy. Shame on them.
There's the injustice
Member for
minister.
Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, well, it's more shameful for the Liberals because the Minister for Industry is blocking the Minister for Finance so that she cannot answer to a question that is up to her responsibility. Perhaps there are internal struggles happening. Perhaps the Deputy Prime Minister has now realized that she is far from the mark. But everything's far too expensive nowadays, Mr. Speaker, and so a clear question, perhaps for the Minister for Finance this time. Madam Minister, why was it fire on inflationary fire? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker.
There he goes, lecturing again.
When it comes to the economy, we have to talk about facts, not merely about partisan rhetoric. And so I'd like to remind Canadians that after the tabling of the budget, S&P renewed Canada's AAA credit rating. I would also like to remind Canadians that Canada has the lowest deficit of all G7 countries. Canada has the best
And the highest
debt
personal
to
debt
GDP
of all
ratio
G7
in the G7.
countries.
Those are facts. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Committee, in Committee on Chinese Interference, David Johnston explained why, in his opinion, a public inquiry should be avoided. Do you know why, Mr. Speaker? Because in his opinion, it is expensive and it takes time. But, Mr. Speaker, do you know what is also expensive and time-consuming? It's more than 3 months. It's more than 3 months of work we've wasted since February, calling up for a public inquiry that everyone wants, except the Liberals and their special rapporteur. The Liberals' resistance to shedding light on the matter is costly and time-consuming.
That's a very good
That's
question.
what undermines public confidence. So when will there be a public and independent inquiry? The Honourable Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Speaker,
There he
you
is,
won't be
Dominic.
surprised that I perhaps have a different
Long.
opinion on time wasting. Time wasting is a leader of the Bloc Québécois that doesn't want to hear from what security officers have to say when it comes to trusted information and top secret information. Time wasting is also inviting Mr. Johnston to a parliamentary committee and spending over 3 hours with him, not to ask him questions about the very substance.
But he didn't
of
even
foreign
write the
affairs, but
report,
to ask
Dominic.
him, or rather, spending 3 hours attacking his integrity. That is time wasting, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières.
Should have hired a high school
Mr.
student
Speaker,
for this.
what is Mr. Johnson proposing instead of a public and independent inquiry that everyone is calling for? Mr. Johnson is proposing himself. That's what he's proposing himself. He's replacing the inquiry. He is the inquiry, despite the House asking him to leave in order to hold his own hearings that are not independent at all. David Johnston, the man who does not want a public inquiry based on information he refuses to make public, David Johnston wants to control what could be discussed in public in his own hearings. Mr. Speaker, this is likely to be less expensive, less time-consuming, but it will also be far less clear. Who can claim that this is not just smoke and mirrors? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's a surprise to no one that intelligence information should be kept secret. That is exactly extant circumstances elsewhere with our allies throughout the world. Good news, Mr. Speaker, we offered opposition leaders, including the Bloc leader, access to this information so they can judge themselves what Mr. Johnston's conclusions are, but they prefer partisan games. They want to attack Mr. Johnston instead of looking facts in the eyes and understand exactly what is happening with foreign interference. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, David Johnston has never been able to answer a simple question on the matter, nor has the government. Whether the federal government was able to hold an independent public inquiry into the case of Maher Harar involving the secret services of foreign countries. If the federal government was able to hold an independent public inquiry into the Air India bombing involving terrorist entities and foreign governments, Why is it all of a sudden too complicated to do so in the case of Chinese interference in Canada, which is aimed at Canadian democracy itself? The Honourable Minister for Canadian
That's
Heritage.
the other block. There's 2 blocks right now.
Mr. Speaker,
Oh,
if the Bloc Québécois
Grandpa
truly
Pablo
were interested in what's
Rodriguez
happening
is
in
up.
Quebec, if they were truly interested in what is worrying
Mr.
Quebecers right now,
Heritage
they would
censorship.
ask questions on forest fires, perhaps, because that is what worries Quebecers right now. If they were sincere,
Well, we
about
had to
asking
get the
questions,
forest
and if they
fires
ask
in here.
questions about fires, then I would like to say that my colleague is in constant communication with the Quebec government. Then we would have had a quick answer. We've intervened
And they're
rapidly.
caused
We respond
by-
rapidly. We'll always be here for Quebec.
Mr. Speaker, to quote former Liberal Premier McNeil, we would all benefit from all governments being able to manage their own budget a lot better. Go figure, Mr. Speaker, after this budget was released, inflation went up. After the carbon tax increased, inflation went up. The Liberals must give Canadians a plan to end their deficits and bring down spending so that we can stop inflation and interest rates. And they must cancel their carbon taxes, Mr. Speaker, that are hurting struggling Canadians the hardest. Mr. Speaker, when are they going to do this?
Well, they'll start talking about climate change
Mr.
here.
Speaker, it is really appalling that the Conservatives continue to talk down the Canadian economy. But the reality is
Ah!
Canada's AAA credit rating was reiterated
Look at that front
after
row.
we tabled the budget. The reality is our economy grew by 3.1% in the first quarter of this year.
There's
We
the
have
school marm.
the strongest recovery in the G7.
Lecturing
And when
everybody.
it comes to inflation, Mr. Speaker, it has gone down from 8.1%
What a front row
last June to 4.4%.
experts.
And Mr. Speaker,
Justin,
it is lower than
Chrystia
inflation
Freeland,
in the US,
David
in the
Lametti.
UK, the OECD average, the EU average.
The honourable member for Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, what's appalling is that this government has done absolutely nothing to help struggling Canadians. We know the Liberals already have one carbon tax in place that will add 41 cents a litre to the price of gas. And now they have carbon tax 2, the terrible sequel that will add another 17 cents. Of course, on top of that, they've added the GST. And when we add that all up, Mr. Speaker, we have an extra 61 cents per litre that will cost people in Ontario $2,300 more. Their plan has failed to do anything but make life more expensive. So why don't they finally scrap
You used to be able
this
to
carbon
buy
tax?
a liter of gas for
Honourable
60
Minister of
cents.
Innovation.
But
Mr.
now
Speaker,
that's
you know
just
what's
the
appalling for
carbon
Canadians who are
tax.
watching at home today? You know what's appalling is that they realize that the Conservative are blocking the clean technology manufacturing tax credit,
That's
a clean
shocking.
electricity tax credit, and a clean hydrogen tax credit. Mr. Speaker, at a time where the world is looking to build the economy of the 21st century, at a time where we need to fight for workers around this country, at a time that we need to position ourselves in the 21st century, you know what's the Conservative answer? Delay, delay, delay. Mr. Speaker, we need to act in the interest of this country.
Well, the Liberals are building the economy of
Member
the
for
15th
Calgary,
century.
Midnapore.
In
Feudalism.
February of 2022, the finance minister said that deficits must be reduced and that this is a line that cannot be crossed. We all know now that this was a broken promise. When the budget was introduced, inflation went up. When the carbon tax increased, inflation went up. So when will this prime minister commit to eliminating inflationary deficits, eliminating inflationary spending, cutting the carbon tax so that Canadians will have
Hey,
lower
right
interest
on,
and
Stephanie.
lower inflation?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
You can knock on this door 10 times a
As I
day
said,
and still get no answer.
Canada has the lowest deficit in the G7. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio.
Didn't I just hear that?
G7. And our AAA credit rating was reaffirmed after we tabled the budget. But what is truly astonishing, Mr. Speaker, is at a time when Alberta has been burning, when Quebec is burning, when Atlantic Canada is burning, when we are struggling to breathe here in Ottawa, this party continues to resist climate action. That is a huge
We
disservice
had to get
every
back to
single
that.
Canadian.
Member for Calgary, Midnapore.
Lowest growth out of all developed countries, Mr. Speaker. When the budget was released, inflation went up. When the carbon tax increased, inflation went up. Former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley said that these fiscal situations have to be managed, otherwise taxpayers run out of money. Well, the time has come. Canadians are out of money. So when will this Prime Minister commit to eliminating inflationary deficits, eliminating inflationary spending, cutting the carbon tax so Canadians can have lower inflation and lower interest
And we
rates.
know the carbon tax is just a tax grab.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Minister of Finance said it quite well. I mean, it's shocking, but I guess it's not, because the Conservatives continue to deny climate change. They continue to deny the fact that we need to act, when right now here in Ottawa, we are feeling the impacts of the forest fires, Mr. Speaker, yet the Conservatives continue to put their heads
And that's got
literally in
absolutely
the sand,
nothing to do
typically of them
with
say,
your carbon
"Let's
tax."
do nothing, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know what, Mr. Speaker, we don't do that on this side of the House. We say we need to act for today, but also for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
People are still buying the same amount of gas, the same amount of fuel for their homes. You just increased the price.
Across the country, we're hemorrhaging the volunteer firefighters we need. There are 15,000 firefighter vacancies across Canada, and understandably so. Our volunteers, who make up 70% of our firefighting efforts, aren't getting the recognition from this government that they deserve. I have a private member's bill to support our volunteer firefighters by increasing their tax credit from $3,000 to $10,000. So will the Liberals finally show our volunteer firefighters the respect they deserve by increasing their tax exemption?
The Honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member opposite for his advocacy and for his important question. Those volunteer firefighters in virtually every community across this country provide an extraordinary service. They deserve our support, and we are committed to finding the best ways to continue to support them through
What a
training,
non-answer from the former open borders minister.
The Honourable Member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Some of these people are just
Mr.
baggage.
Speaker, last Friday, I met with a group in New Hazelton that works with adults with developmental disabilities. They told me that about half their clients are receiving letters from the CRA clawing back CERB benefits. The Liberals know full well that people living with disabilities are struggling to make ends meet, that they're twice as likely to be living in poverty, and yet instead of helping them, they're harassing them with these CERB clawback letters. So will the minister do the right thing and stand today and commit to ending the CERB clawback for people with disabilities?
Hear, hear. L'Honorable Ministre du Revenu National.
The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. And I'd also like to say that we appreciate all the efforts made during the pandemic to help people get through this difficult period. Mr. Speaker, as we've said, at the CRA, things are done on a case-by-case basis, and we would encourage people to contact the CRA and take necessary measures. We are here to help people. Thank you very much. The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Mr. Speaker, at the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, we often hear from witnesses that NATO plays a key role in maintaining peace and security on both sides of the Atlantic. Currently, Canada is responsible for creating a Centre of Excellence on Climate Change and Security in Montreal. With all the wildfire smoke covering Canada, this is particularly relevant. Our government's attention is on the climate, but by contrast, the Conservatives are preventing us from debating the budget implementation. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs explain the importance of leadership on the climate?
Nice softball question.
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
There's
This is an
Melanie.
excellent question from my colleague. I'd like to thank him for his work. I just came back from the NATO meeting in Norway. We know that climate change is having an impact on our health, but also on our security. And this situation will only continue to become exacerbated with time. We need to understand the impact of climate change on defense in the Northern Atlantic. That is why Canada will be directing that new Centre on Climate Change and Security. We will help our allies, and we will be pushing the Conservative Party
For Foothills.
What a nonsensical
fueling food
response
inflation as
to a
grocery prices are
nonsensical
up another
question.
10%, costing Canadian families another $1,000 a year just to put food on the table. And the Canada Food Price Report predicts that food prices will go up a stunning 34% over the next 2 years. That's not even the bad news. That does not include the implications of the Liberals' second carbon tax. A carbon
Well,
tax
they're
will add
knocking on the
61
door
cents a
again.
liter to the price of gas, which will increase the cost of food production.
Watch, we're going to
and
hear about the
transportation.
fires again,
How much
having
more
something
will
to do
Canadians have to
with
pay
the
to
carbon
feed their
tax.
families when the Liberals implement a second carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, they brought
And I
this
thank my
guy up
honourable
again.
colleague for his question, and he has in this House risen on a number of occasions to speak on behalf of farmers. So I have in front of me a press release from
The former
Canola
Greenpeace
Council of Canada,
activist.
Mr. Speaker, congratulating our government for the clean fuel regulations. And I quote, "We're pleased to see the CFR provides options that would minimize regulatory burden and allow canola to be used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through biofuel
This guy
production."
is
Mr.
dumber
Speaker,
than a bag
they
of
talk about
hammers.
the $2 billion of expanded canola processing capacity that our clean fuel regulations will provide to Canadian canola grocers. This member and this party are saying no to all of these investments, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Foothills.
Of the carbon tax on Canadian farmers. An average 5,000-acre farm will pay $150,000 a year in carbon taxes. Alberta ranchers who use gas co-ops are paying 60% more in federal carbon taxes than they are for the actual natural gas. 44% of fruit and vegetable producers are selling at a loss. And Food Bank uses up a stunning 60%, with more than 8 million Canadians using them every single month. And this is before the knockout blow of a second carbon tax. Again, how much more will Canadians have to pay to feed their families when the Liberals implement a second carbon tax?
61 cents a liter. That's so much more.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
What my colleague calls a typical farm is actually 3%, the 3% biggest farms in Canada. The projection he's talking about is based on a scenario where farmers would take absolutely no action, would adopt no good practices, would not use any new technologies to improve the agriculture to make it more resilient. This is what my colleague is referring to.
The Liberals want to starve
Farmers
us.
are very committed to reduce emissions.
They don't
to have a
want
more
farmers to
sustainable
produce
agriculture,
anything.
more resilient in the case of all these extreme weather events. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Beauce.
It might produce a greenhouse gas or
The
two.
Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, this government is so disconnected. Many Canadian families are struggling to put food on the table. 20% are skipping meals, and the use of food banks in my riding has gone up by 30%. The carbon tax is making the costs of agricultural production go up, as well as the cost of food. Canadians are not able to pay the additional $1,000 that this government is taxing from them. So when will this government finally get rid of the carbon tax so that families can finally put food on the table again? The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
There's
Thank
this
you,
clown
Mr.
again.
Speaker. My colleague is talking about the agricultural sector, and the measures that we are putting into place will help that sector like others. I have here a press release from the Canola Producers of Canada, who are congratulating the government on our clean fuel regulation, which will enable us to invest $2 billion in canola production in Canada to help to reduce the impact of greenhouse gases in agriculture and transportation, whereas the Conservatives are saying no to those investments and yes to more climate change. The Honourable Member for Beauce.
Oh, big
Mr. Speaker,
charade.
unlike what my colleague across the way keeps saying, and in fact, I'm surprised to not have heard that today, that Quebec is not affected by the carbon tax. Had I heard that, I would have answered that Quebec is affected by the carbon tax. The first carbon tax affected us indirectly when we imported products like produce from Ontario. Transportation and other inputs play an important role in setting costs, and the second carbon tax will affect us directly, with a cost of $436 per family, as the Parliamentary Budget Officer noted. So once again, when will the government finally axe the carbon tax?
They're knocking one more
The
time.
Honourable Minister of Health.
Now they got that.
Mr. Speaker, we often hear
Bring up
our
another
Quebec
minister
Conservative colleagues
to read the
having
talking
to
points.
defend the opposition leader's cruel economic policies. How can the leader of the opposition justify his cruel arguments where he says that global inflation is caused by the fact that low-income people needed help? How can he explain the cruelty of his advice to invest in cryptocurrencies to protect ourselves from inflation?
Somebody had to
which
mention
would have left
cryptocurrencies
led to
today.
people losing half their savings? And how can he explain to the member for Beauce, how can he explain the fact that households don't have
Bring
right
up
to
the
dental
Minister for
assistance?
Mental Health next.
The Honourable
She's
Member for
really a
Fontenay.
scream.
Mr. Speaker, BP is complaining that it's being accused of engaging in exploration in the middle of a protected marine area in Nova Scotia, which is too bad for the company, which is hard for them because they're allowed to look for oil there, but they're not allowed to exploit it. But according to Radio-Canada, what the Minister of Natural Resources answered,
This woman is
he
so
said
out
to
to
BP that if
lunch.
they find a lot of oil, and I'm quoting the minister
It's
here,
almost
he
like
said that the
she's a party
area
unto herself.
of the protected marine area could be redrawn. Will the minister immediately take back what he said and confirm that a marine protected area
Doesn't
will
think the
never
Liberals
be
are doing
rejiggered so
enough
that we can extract oil from it?
fighting climate change.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
All
Mr.
she
Speaker,
got
when
was a
we formed
parliamentary
government,
secretary.
only 1% of our marine areas were protected. Now it is over 30%. There is a goal of 30% by 2030, and we are currently over 14%. We are doing good work.
I'm glad you think so.
And just last week, we also, with the Atlantic Accords, we have ensured that in Newfoundland, there will be new wind energy projects, which will be important for the economy and the environment. The Honourable Member for Avignon-Amicis Matane-Matapedian. Mr. Speaker, it would be hard to believe this answer if this weren't a government that bends over backwards to please oil companies. BP is complaining that it can't extract oil in a marine protected area, so the government's answer should be very clear: scram and look for oil elsewhere. But instead, the minister said to BP, if you find oil in that area, well, poof, it's like magic. It won't be a protected area anymore. Problem solved. Mr. Speaker, when will this government stop facilitating climate change? The
You
Honourable
believe
Parliamentary
it?
Secretary.
How anybody could
Mr.
possibly
Speaker, first of all,
criticize the Liberals for not pandering
these are only
to
exploratory
climate
permits,
change
not for
activists.
production. And I think that's very important because it's when it's for production, there's an entire environmental assessment system that the company needs to go through. That's very important to recognize. And not only that,
Not only
we will
that,
continue to protect our waters and lands. There was only 1% protected when we formed government. We are already at 14%, and we will continue to 30% by 2030.
The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan.
if there's a country left by
What do you
2030.
call a Liberal finance minister with an NDP credit card, Mr. Speaker? Inflationary. But it's no joke. The Liberal spending spree is fueling inflation and putting pressure on households right across the country. With all their deficit spending, they're even making former Liberal finance ministers like John Manley and Bill Morneau blush fire engine red, Mr. Speaker. Now, speaking of fire, do the Liberals and their SpendDP backers understand that their reckless spending is torching the economy, or do they simply want to burn it all down?
The Honourable.
Well, watch, they'll get the wildfires in here.
Mr. Speaker, what is burning right now is the forests.
I told you.
This is a desperately serious moment when we have had forest fires in Alberta. We have fires burning
Because of
We have
arsonists.
fires burning across Atlantic Canada. We can breathe the smoke when we walk
Of course, the Liberals will
outside
probably
this
let the
building.
arsonists right out of jail without
This is a
any
moment
bail
for
at all.
utter seriousness. It is a moment for climate action. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? In blocking our BIA, the Conservatives are blocking our clean energy plan.
Isn't she
that will
tiresome?
help create jobs in
Honourable Member for York Simcoe.
Oh.
Mr. Speaker,
Can you imagine having to
Canadians are on
listen
the
to her
ropes trying to
all
pay
day?
This Liberal carbon tax, which raises gas prices by 41 cents a litre every single time they fill up. But like a 1-2 punch, this Prime Minister is now forcing a second carbon tax on Canadians, adding another 17 cents to the cost of fuel. Canadians are already down for the count, having to take on extra jobs and turn to food banks just to get by. Instead of sucker punching Canadians, will the Liberals axe the carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Oh, they brought up Guilbeault again.
I'd like to read a weather alert on the Environment Canada's website. Special air quality
He's been
statements.
checking out environment. He's
Levels of
checking out his own
air due to
website.
Smog from forest fires. Smoke plumes from forest fires in Quebec and northeastern Ontario have resulted in deteriorated air quality. The air quality in our national's capital, Mr. Speaker, is worse than it is in Mexico City, in Jakarta, and in Kolkata. We have all all of this because of the forest fires. And what's the response from the Conservative Party? Let's make pollution free again. Not on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
What does that even mean?
The honourable member for Pont-Neuf-Jacques-Cartier.
What an
Thank you, Mr.
incredibly
Speaker. This government's been in
reckless
power
and
for 8 years,
stupid
and the only
way
thing that it has
to
done for the
describe
environment is to
carbon.
tax carbon. And we see how well that's working. Anyone can look and see the wildfire smoke outside. Worse still, they want to add a second carbon tax, which will be additionally taxed under GST. They promised to plant 2 billion trees, but instead they are taking the easier path. These fruitless second taxes. When will this government finally wake up, stop reaching into Canadians' wallets, give them some breathing room, and axe the tax? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, listen, I'm always gobsmacked when I hear the Conservatives trying to tell us that they are the party of common sense. Let me refresh their memory. Denying climate change, reducing women's rights, reducing help for families, going out for dinner with far-right politicians, advising people to buy cryptocurrencies, and I could go on and on. Is that really conservative
I'm
common
sure you
sense?
could go on and on,
It's high time.
but I'm sure
that
nobody
they
really
should
wants
do
to listen
better.
to you.
Because this kind of common sense is not what Canadians want.
Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Canadians expect this House to be a place of debate and for political parties to disagree on issues. What they don't expect is for party leaders to delay and avoid these debates with parliamentary tricks and obstructionist tactics. That's why Canadians were appalled when the leader of the Conservatives bragged he is intentionally delaying the Budget Implementation Act.
I'm trying to hear what the honourable member is saying, but there's all kinds of
I
noise,
wasn't
and
trying
needed
too
to look
hard.
it out. I want to hear what she had to say, so start over so I can see whether it's offensive or not. Please start.
Thank you, Speaker. Canadians expect this House to be a place for debate and for political parties to disagree on issues. What they don't expect is for party leaders to delay and avoid these debates with parliamentary tricks and obstructionist tactics. That's why Canadians were appalled when the leader of the Conservatives bragged he is intentionally delaying the Budget Implementation Act. Speaker, can the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance remind this House of the significant measures the
I
Conservatives are blocking?
feel the softball question coming.
Well, the honourable
Can the minister explain why the budget
I thank
is
the honourable
so
member for Hamilton Mountain
wonderful?
for that question. Mr. Speaker, for the Conservative leader to appear in front of the press and brag that his party is going to delay the debate on the BIA is the height of irresponsibility. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative delays are holding up tax deduction and benefits for working Canadians. They're holding up protections for air passengers. And shamefully, Mr. Speaker, they're holding up the codification of sanctions against Russia for their illegal war in Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, the height of the irresponsibility, shame on the Conservatives.
The honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
He was proud of himself. You see, he sat down and smiled.
Out of money. What's the Liberal solution?
Done a good job.
Tax. In fact, a tax on a tax.
Actually, you just look
Original
like a
carbon tax
witless idiot.
added 41 cents a liter onto gas. Now this second carbon tax is going to add an additional 17 cents a liter onto gasoline.
right.
So then when you factor in carbon tax and GST, that's 61 cents a liter on gas.
61 cents a liter.
Alberta drive a lot. It's a fact of life. Traveling for work, medical appointments, and groceries. So my question is simple. When will the Liberals do the right thing and axe the tax?
That's right. Good question.
The honourable Minister of Innovation.
You know, Mr. Speaker, what's out of touch is to delay the implementation of a clean
Oh, they're giving
technology
champagne lots of time today to make a fool of himself.
my riding in your province,
But
Mr.
it doesn't
Speaker.
take 3 or
Your
4
family
attempts.
being
He does it
displaced in my
the first
riding
time.
today, and they cannot understand that a party, anyone being elected, would delay clean electricity, clean energy, or clean hydrogen. Mr. Speaker, it's not only delaying, it's irresponsible.
Yeah, look at that front
As our
bench.
country is burning, Mr. Speaker, it's incumbent on each of us to act to make sure
That's
that
the
we
sorry
save,
lot
Mr.
that's
Speaker,
governing
what is
Canada.
The honourable member for Prince Albert.
Speaker, Canadians are struggling with the cost of food. Canadians are struggling with the cost of fuel. Canadians are facing a cost of living crisis.
Yeah, they're going to try one
And
more
yet,
time with
what
this
is
carbon
Liberal
tax
government doing
question.
about it? They're adding.
I wonder who
a
they'll
carbon tax.
put up to answer
Mr.
this
Speaker,
one.
Canadians need a break, not a tax. 61 cents a liter is the difference between buying food or paying the rent. Why won't this Liberal government do the right thing, give Canadians a break, and axe the tax?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister for Families.
I don't believe it.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, this government is doing the right thing. We are fighting climate change and we are working to make life more affordable for Canadians. We understand that there is no future economy.
They're making
There's
life
no future for
less
Canadians if we
affordable
don't
for
tackle
Canadians.
The climate emergency
They're
that we are
fighting
facing
Canadians.
right now.
They're not
we can actually
fighting
all
climate
taste
change.
the smoke from the forest fires in this chamber right now. This is unprecedented, Mr. Speaker. So while we fight climate change, we are also putting forward things like the grocery rebate to help Canadian families with the high cost of food. We are also doing things like cutting childcare fees.
Yeah, they
in
take
half, which is
$5
saving
with one
Canadian
hand and
families
give back a buck with the
thousands
other.
of dollars a month.
The Honourable
That's
Leader
what
of the
their rebates
Opposition.
are all about.
Several years ago, a group of shady consultants gave fake admission letters to mostly Punjabi students who came here in good faith to study and be part of the Canadian family. They came here, they followed the law, they studied, many of them completed their programs, and it was the incompetent Liberal government that had accepted the letters in the first place. Now this government is kicking them out of the country, sending them home to poverty and bankruptcy for their families. Why won't this government reverse its incompetence, show a little bit of common sense and compassion, and let those who came here in good faith and are contributing to our economy halt the deportation and allow them to apply for permanent residency?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say I will not take any lessons from the member of the official opposition on immigration cases. What I want to say to this
Well, it's
House
about time you
is
started.
that we want to ensure that those who are not responsible for fraud will have an opportunity to demonstrate their situation and present evidence to support their case, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, the integrity of our immigration system remains at the utmost importance. Mr. Speaker, we are actively looking at these reports on a case by case, and we will make good on our commitment in helping international students.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, during Environment Week, I want to acknowledge Canada's progress since 2015. We're reducing emissions with our emissions reduction plan and getting to net zero nationwide while creating clean jobs. We're investing in net zero emission vehicles and eliminating harmful single-use plastics. We've accomplished a lot, but there's more to do. Could the Minister of Environment and Climate Change tell this House more about our government's ongoing environmental efforts?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his question. We are, in fact, battling climate change as we have the strongest economic growth of all the G7 countries, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, he
We've put in
read that
place
too.
Measures that will create thousands of jobs in Canada, boosting Canada's economy for the coming years and for the coming decades. And we're doing that while we've reduced climate pollution by 50 million tons, Mr. Speaker, the equivalent of removing from our roads 11 million vehicles. We can fight climate change and we can have a strong economies while supporting Canadians. Unfortunately, the Conservatives want to do none of these things.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Before colonialism, Inuit, First Nations, and Métis had their own forms of policing. For decades, genocidal policies are enforced by the RCMP and local law enforcement. First Nations in Northern Ontario undertook their own community policing. This government is going against reconciliation by refusing to renegotiate new agreements. This leaves 30,000 Indigenous peoples without local police forces. When will this government provide funding to keep Indigenous communities safe?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by thanking my colleague for her question.
There's another
This
winner.
is a government that has made historic investments in First Nations.
The guy who
policing,
just
over
can't tell the truth.
$60 million, which we are rolling out in communities right across the country. We know that the path to reconciliation lies in empowering First Nations and Inuit communities right across the land so that they can drive the solutions that will best protect their communities. That is precisely the work that we are committed to doing in trust, in respect with First Nations and Inuit communities right across the land. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
It's been more than 2 years since the Afzal family was targeted and brutally murdered in London. It's unthinkable that this could happen to a family in our city, but we've seen the amazing resilience that can counter white supremacy and Islamophobia. Communities are calling for this government to combat online hate and support survivors of hate-motivated crimes. Will this government commit to establishing a national support fund for victims of hate-motivated crimes and support the NDP's online algorithm
Does this woman still think
transparency act
COVID's
to help
raging?
the Afzal family and countless others?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Don't worry, they're getting to their
Mr. Speaker, I thank the
they're
member obviously
registered.
for that very important question for advocacy for the community, the Muslim community in London, Ontario. The issue of Islamophobia is one that affects Muslims around this country and indeed around the world. It is an issue that we must continue to all work vigilantly upon. What I find very concerning is on today, a day when we were debating the budget, that very budget includes dedicated funds of over $50 million towards combating racism and Islamophobia. Those are the types of initiatives all members of this House need to get behind. Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for question period today. I wish to draw the attention of members to a presence in the gallery.
I would like to draw
Well, folks,
the attention of members to
that's
the
all for
presence
today.
in the gallery of the
I hope you
Honorable Jeff
enjoyed it.
Regan,
It's
the
always
36th
entertaining.
Speaker of the
Sometimes
House of
more,
Commons.
some days more than others. But it's been a pleasure being with you today. This is David Krayden. Stand on guard with David Krayden. Hope you enjoyed question period day. We'll be back tomorrow with some more of this fun and games.
We have a point of order. The Honourable Member for Louis